You ever stand in a room so polished it makes you wonder if the floors have ever seen dirt? I'm talking about the kind of clean that smells like money old enough to have names carved into university buildings and portraits hanging in private clubs. That's Crestmore Hills for you. And tonight, I stood in the crown jewel of it all, the Aldridge estate, where even the chandeliers seemed to judge you. The marble foyer echoed beneath my boots, not stilettos, mind you, boots. Sensible, black leather, worn just enough to prove I walk like the rest of us. Above me, a 20-foot Christmas tree sparkled in designer symmetry, every ornament a name-brand statement. Baccarat crystal, hand-blown Murano glass, custom gold foil initials. A monument to wealth curated like an Instagram influencer's dream. Me? I wore a black sweater from the clearance rack at Breyer and Company. Target chic. Didn't matter. It hugged me just fine, covered what needed covering, and reminded me who I was. I adjusted it in the antique mirror of the powder room, a mirror older than my whole apartment complex growing up. I could still hear their voices just beyond the door, lilting with practiced charm. Laughter that had been trained in prep schools and polished with power. They didn't know yet. About me. About tonight. They still thought I was Nathan Aldridge's accidental wife. The one he met while experimenting with the working class Caroline Aldridge's exact words during brunch one Sunday when she didn't realize I'd walked in behind her. I'd smiled then, poured her more tea. Sometimes, the best seat at the table is the one they don't know you're sitting in. You'd think marrying into a dynasty like the Aldridges might buy you some grace. But no. They made sure I knew I was an outsider from the moment Nathan put a ring on my finger. The only time they invited me to their country club, the valet thought I was staff. I was holding a fruit tray at the time, so fair assumption, I suppose. I should have been nervous, standing there in that mirror, about to face them again. But instead, I felt still. That kind of still you get when the tide pulls back right before the wave crashes. My fingers brushed the silver pendant at my neck, my mother's. Nothing fancy, but it pulsed like a lighthouse against my chest. I wasn't alone in that mansion. Not really. Every night my father worked extra hours scrubbing boardroom floors. Every day my mother cooked on a single burner while I did homework on cardboard boxes. We were all there together, standing straight-backed in Target threads. I stepped out of the powder room. The warmth hit first, rich mahogany walls, golden lighting, and the scent of cinnamon, clove, and wealth. You know how money has a smell? It's not just perfume and pine. It's the absence of fear. These people didn't worry about bills or layoffs or surprise doctor visits. They lived in a different language, one where tight on cash meant selling the yacht, not skipping dinner. Caroline Aldridge. The matriarch, Queen Bee, ice goddess, descended the staircase like an actress entering a final act. Draped in something undoubtedly couture, she glided over, air kissing my cheek like it was a public favor. "Isabel, darling," she said, smiling just enough to show teeth but not too much to risk a wrinkle. "So glad you could join us." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, voice calm and polite. "I'm fluent in Aldridge now. You have to be to survive." From the far corner, I caught Aunt Marlene mouthing something to Cousin Elise. Elise stifled a laugh behind her champagne. I didn't need lip-reading skills to guess the word. Gold digger. They loved that term. Tossed it around like confetti every time I wore a dress without a label or refused a glass of Dom because I actually liked tap water. The funny part? They were half right. I did dig. Just not for gold. I dug into spreadsheets and shell companies, into market trends and backdoor buyouts. I dug until I owned more of their legacy than they did. But they didn't know that yet. Tonight, I was still the quaint wife from nowhere, someone they let hover at the edges of their empire. "Elena," someone chirped behind me. "Oh, it's Isabel." "Right. Sorry. You look festive." That was Aubrey. Married into the family for money and status, then convinced everyone she was born to it. She was dressed like a Vogue spread and looked at me like I was holding a sparkler in a glass museum. "Thanks," I said, flashing her the same warm smile I'd used to greet a snake. "I just love how you always dress down," she added, as if she meant it as a compliment. "It's so grounded." I nodded. "Well, it's easy when you start on the ground." She blinked, not sure if I'd just insulted myself or her. Before she could respond, Nathan appeared beside me. My anchor. He wore the same worn blazer he'd had since law school, the one I loved for its honesty. His smile cut through the tension like a match. "You okay?" he asked quietly, eyes scanning my face. "Perfect," I replied. He didn't know. Not yet. And I'd kept it that way on purpose. He'd fallen in love with me when I had nothing, when I was just a woman with ambition, a scholarship, and a crazy work ethic. He didn't care about titles or inheritance. That's what made him different from the rest. And it's why I kept my secret until I could reveal it not as a power play, but as a declaration. Over his shoulder, I saw the gathering snowball. Cousins, uncles, board members who wore their last names like shields. Conversations drifted between art investments and vacation homes in Provence. Occasionally, someone would glance my way and do a double take, as if my very presence upset the photograph they were trying to curate. I didn't belong. That much was clear. And yet, I did. Not because I forced myself into the frame, but because I built the damn camera. Every snide look, every whispered comment, they never realized I was listening. Watching. Calculating. For them, this was another holiday of wine, gossip, and legacy. For me, this was the prologue. "Excuse me," I murmured to Nathan, squeezing his hand once before I made my way toward the library. My laptop was in my bag. The documents were ready. The contract signed. The chairman briefed. The company, the one they thought they ruled, was mine. But that part? That comes later. For now, I was still the outsider in Crestmore Hills. And they still thought they had the upper hand. Funny how they never realized that the real danger doesn't come from those already sitting at the table. It comes from the ones they never thought to seat. You ever try carrying a secret that hums under your skin like an electric current? The kind of secret that makes every conversation feel like a game of poker, every smile a bluff, every polite nod a loaded move. That's what it felt like, walking through the Aldridge estate, knowing I owned the very company they built their identities around. The truth was tucked under my arm in a soft leather laptop bag. Inside it, encrypted files sat like a loaded weapon, ownership records, email chains, board memos, and internal performance audits. Not rumors. Not speculation. Not gossip. Facts. Signed, sealed, and delivered. Everything I needed to show that Aldridge Global no longer belonged to the Aldridges. Not in the way they assumed. It belonged to me. And I had the paperwork to prove it. But I wasn't ready to drop that bomb just yet. No, tonight was about timing. Precision. Watching the cracks form before the entire facade shattered. I made my way past the gilded framed oil paintings of Nathan's ancestors. All of them frozen in poses meant to intimidate. Steely eyes, pressed suits, hands on polished oak desks. The last one, Nathan's grandfather, Clarence Aldridge, had started the company in 1946. Or so they say. The part they leave out? He inherited the seed money from a textile empire built on underpaid immigrant labor. But hey, legacy sounds prettier when you dress it up in white tie history. I paused under Clarence's portrait and looked up at him. "Hope you're watching," I whispered. It was poetic, really. The janitor's daughter walking these halls like she belonged, because she did. I belonged here more than any of them. I hadn't inherited power. I'd built it, one deliberate move at a time. While they were hosting charity galas and debating vacation homes in Santorini, I was learning. Watching. Making phone calls from airport lounges. Studying supply chains and turnover rates. Collecting receipts like puzzle pieces. They'd always thought I was harmless. The girl from nowhere who married into privilege. Cute. Unrefined. Maybe a little too quiet at dinner parties. That quiet? It was focus. The harmlessness? Strategy. I never corrected them when they assumed I was just a consultant. I let Nathan believe it too, because I didn't want our love tangled up in assumptions about power. He respected hard work, admired ambition, but I needed him to see me before he saw what I was building. And what I was building was vast. It started 2 years ago with a small logistics company out of Montreal. The CEO, a woman named Lillian, was brilliant, just overextended. I invested. Quietly. under an alias. Within 6 months, we turned a profit. Then came an underpriced distribution firm in Denver, a struggling tech startup in Minneapolis, and finally, the coup de grace, a controlling interest in Aldridge Global through a cascade of holding companies they never thought to trace. Funny what you can do when you stop asking for permission. I didn't buy Aldridge Global because I wanted revenge. That would have been too small. I bought it because I believed in what it could be. The company had potential, untapped, overlooked, dismissed. Just like the people who kept it running, the assistants, the technicians, the janitors. People like my father. My dad used to come home smelling like floor wax and lemon cleaner. His hands were always cracked in the winter, fingertips stained from chemicals. But he held his head high. We may clean the offices, he once told me, but we see what they don't. It wasn't just about observation, it was about insight. And he was right. The cleaning staff hears everything. They're invisible until they're not. That idea never left me. So I built my empire in silence. Quiet moves. Calculated acquisitions. Boardroom votes made through proxies. Every time someone in this family ignored me, it gave me another advantage. They were too busy mocking my wardrobe to notice I was outmaneuvering them. They never saw me as a threat. And that was their first mistake. I slipped into the sunroom, where a few of the lesser Aldridges gathered over wine and idle gossip. They barely acknowledged me, which was fine. I wasn't here for them. "Elise, did you hear the company might be acquired?" one of the cousins asked, swirling her Merlot. "Some foreign investors." "Sounds dreadful." "Oh, please," Elise scoffed. "No one would dare. We're Aldridge Global. We don't get bought. We buy." I bit back a smile. That's the thing about dynasties. They think their name is a moat that can't be crossed. But moats don't matter when you learn how to build a bridge. Or, better yet, how to swim silently underneath. "Elise," I said gently, "any idea who the investors are?" She looked at me like a houseplant had spoken. "No clue," she said. "But if I find out, I'll make sure the board squashes it." "You do that, sweetheart." I slipped away again, letting their arrogance fill the room like perfume, overpowering and too expensive. The same perfume I'd smelled last year when I sat at the far end of the Christmas table, listening to Caroline recount the struggles of managing a vacation property in Lake Como. I remember the moment I made the decision. As she waved her champagne glass and made a joke about immigrant work ethic, I knew. One day, I would show them what real work ethic looked like. And that day was today. I made my way up the back staircase to the office. Nathan's father, Charles, kept a collection of vintage globes in there. He loved spinning them dramatically during business conversations, like a cartoon villain. The room was empty now, quiet except for the ticking of the mantel clock and the faint sound of carols playing downstairs. I pulled out my laptop and opened it. The folder was titled Rhea's Initiative, named after my mother's maiden name. She was the one who taught me how to be gracious even when they're throwing dirt. Especially then. Ownership charts. Proxy votes. Performance evaluations. Audit results. It was all there. The bloodline dynasty was rotting from the inside, and no one had bothered to notice. They were still polishing the crown while the walls collapsed around them. And I was done watching. They'd spent years treating me like a curiosity, a novelty, like Nathan had picked me up from a community service project. But it's amazing what you can build when no one's watching, when they're too busy laughing behind champagne flutes to see the ground shifting beneath them. You know what power feels like? It's not loud. It doesn't strut or shout. It's still, steady, heavy in the best way. It's being able to walk through a room full of people who think they own everything and knowing they don't even own the conversation anymore. Not tonight. Tonight, the outsider holds the deed. And they're about to find out the cost of underestimating her. They always save the gifts for last. After the wine, after the whispered gossip, after the obligatory toast to heritage and hard-earned success by someone who had neither earned nor worked. That's when they gathered around the towering Christmas tree in the Aldridge Great Room and presented each other with opulence wrapped in hand-painted paper and custom silk ribbons. Gifts weren't about generosity in this house. They were performance art. Nathan leaned toward me on the velvet love seat near the fireplace and whispered, "Brace yourself. I smiled. It's just a gift exchange, right? He gave a soft laugh, the kind that said he wished that were true. In this family, it's a chess match. Wrapped in Chanel. I knew. Oh, I knew. But what Nathan couldn't know yet, was that the game was already over. The queen had moved. The board was mine. Still, I played my part. I crossed my legs neatly. I folded my hands in my lap. I kept my smile warm, polite. I knew the cameras were on, metaphorically speaking. That's how the Aldridges operated. Nothing happened without silent observers, social audits, and mental notes stored for future leverage. Caroline, the high priestess of passive aggression, called everyone to attention with a clink of her crystal glass. The string quartet quieted. Well, darlings, she said, voice rich with drama, it's time for the moment we've all been waiting for. The annual Aldridge family exchange. Applause. Sighs. Polished grins. A few dramatic flips of hair. One by one, the gifts were handed out. Elise received a rare art print. Damon unwrapped a leather briefcase embossed with the family crest. Aubrey received a limited edition watch and crowed about how discreet the price tag was, which was code for obscenely expensive. Then Caroline turned to me. And now, she said, pausing for effect like a stage actress, something special for Isabel. I could already feel the tension in the room tilt like a crooked painting. The pause was too long. The smiles too tight. Nathan shifted beside me. Caroline gestured toward Victoria, Nathan's cousin and a lifelong connoisseur of weaponized sweetness. We all contributed, Victoria said, placing the box in my lap. It was wrapped in matte black paper with a gold silk bow so large it could have been worn as a fascinator. Her smile was the kind that usually came with a blade tucked behind it. We thought this was appropriate, she added. The box was heavy. Real weight, not emotional metaphor. But as I held it, it felt more like a test than a present. I didn't blink. I undid the ribbon slowly. I peeled the paper back, careful, controlled. The box beneath was embossed leather, rich, burgundy, and absurdly luxurious. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a leather-bound book with gold-embossed lettering across the cover. From rags to refinement, a guide to social advancement and proper etiquette for the aspiring class. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked at the book. I looked at them. And then I smiled. I could feel Nathan tense beside me. Are you kidding me? He whispered, but I placed my hand gently on his arm. Let them have their moment. Let them think this was the peak. Let them believe they'd won something tonight. Isn't it just delightful? Alexandra chimed, her voice like sugar over glass. We thought you'd appreciate some guidance. Especially with all the challenges of adapting to a new social sphere. It even has a chapter on appropriate clothing choices for holiday gatherings, Victoria added, eyes flicking to my black sweater. There it was. The full play. The old money assault, soft, smiling, and sharpened to a fine point. Nathan sat up straighter. This is a joke, right? No, Caroline said smoothly. It's heartfelt. Truly. We just want Isabel to feel at home in our world. Your world. I almost laughed. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I opened the book, flipping through the absurd chapters. The Art of Subtle Conversation, How to Gracefully Decline Invitations to Lower-Class Functions, Dressing for Your Husband's Career. It was satire masquerading as sophistication. A relic from a time when power came from lineage, not action. I closed the book, placed it back in the box, and nodded. Thank you, I said evenly. A few of them blinked. Confused, maybe. Disappointed that I didn't cry or storm out or crumble. But I wasn't here to give them theatrics. I was here to end dynasties. Don't you just adore the craftsmanship? Caroline continued, trying to regain control of the moment. It's a custom edition. I nodded again. Of course. You must have put a lot of thought into this. Indeed, Margaret said from her corner perch. We even had the dedication printed inside. I flipped the book open again. Inside the front cover, in gold script. To Isabel, may you learn the ways of those who came before you. What they didn't know, what made the entire moment so beautifully ironic, was that I'd already learned everything I needed to know from those who came before me. Just not their people. I learned it from my father, who showed me how power ignores humility until humility becomes strategy. From my mother, who could command a room with nothing but poise and a $10 dress. From years of working in offices that had ceilings I wasn't supposed to break, only to own them quietly one day. These people thought they were giving me a lesson. But what they'd handed me was fuel. And just then, I caught Wesley Darnell entering the room. The chairman. The real deal. Not a family member by blood, but by corporate royalty. He rarely attended these things. Too business-minded for gossip, too powerful to waste time. And yet, here he was. Henry Aldridge, Nathan's father, leapt up to greet him, masking surprise with practiced hospitality. "Wesley, didn't expect to see you tonight." "I thought it was time," Wesley said calmly, his eyes scanning the room before landing on me. He smiled. "And I believe it's long overdue we speak with Isabel." Privately. The room stiffened. "Me?" I asked innocently. "Yes," Wesley said. "You've got some documents I believe we should go over before tomorrow." Caroline looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. "Now? On Christmas Eve?" "It's urgent," Wesley replied, his voice polite but immovable. I rose, tucking the book gently back into the box. I looked at Caroline, then Victoria, then Alexandra, each of them clinging to smiles like lifelines. "This has been enlightening," I said. "Truly." Then I walked past them, the book still in hand. Let them hold their breath. Let them wonder what Wesley wanted. Let them think the book was the final word in our story. They had no idea it was just the opening line. They say timing is everything. Whoever said it probably never had to sit through a Christmas Eve cocktail hour surrounded by silk-wrapped aristocrats who just handed them an etiquette book as a gift. But then again, maybe that's the moment when timing matters most. Wesley Darnell, chairman of Aldridge Global, and the only man in this house who actually knew what I was capable of, had just asked to speak with me privately. The timing? Impeccable. The delivery? Even better. I followed him down the east corridor of the Aldridge mansion, past a row of frosted windows that looked out onto the snow-covered grounds. The world outside was soft and silent, but inside me, the storm had already started. Not a nervous storm, something else. Something calm and controlled. The kind of pressure that builds before a strike. "Didn't think you'd come tonight," I said casually as we walked. Wesley chuckled under his breath. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." He didn't need to elaborate. We both knew what was coming. We entered the Aldridge study, a room that looked like it had been designed by an architect who'd asked, what would a Bond villain read by the fire? Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined in mahogany, a crystal decanter set untouched on the bar cart, the smell of cigars that hadn't been smoked in decades but lingered out of respect. Wesley shut the door behind us. "You ready for this?" he asked. "I've been ready since they called my father service help and made him park in the back alley during their holiday party," I replied. "So yeah, I'm ready." He smiled. Not with condescension, more like appreciation. I placed my laptop bag on the polished oak desk and retrieved the folder. This wasn't a USB moment. This needed paper. Something they could hold. Something they couldn't deny. "This is the full ownership breakdown," I said. Every holding company. Every proxy vote. Every acquisition point that led to a controlling interest. Wesley opened the folder and nodded as he skimmed the documents. He already knew what was in them. He'd seen most of it during our private meetings over the last few weeks. But now he was reading it like a script. Preparing for the curtain rise. "Did Nathan ever catch on?" he asked. "No," I said. "I kept it from him on purpose." Wesley raised an eyebrow. "You don't think he should have known?" I took a breath. He's the only Aldridge who ever treated me like an equal. Who saw me before the last name, before the pedigree, before the status. If I'd told him, he'd have tried to protect me. And this, I gestured around the room, isn't a moment that needs protection. It needs presence. I need to do this on my own terms. Wesley gave a quiet nod. The kind that said, "I get it." "You're not just buying a company," he said. "You're reshaping a dynasty." "I'm not interested in dynasties," I replied. "I'm interested in results." He closed the folder. Well, then let's give them some. He turned and reached for the door. Wesley, I said. Let me go first. He paused, hand on the doorknob. They need to see me as they always have. Just for a few more minutes. Then you walk in. He smiled. You want the full dramatic reveal? No, I said. I want them to see what power looks like when it doesn't need to announce itself. He gave a slight bow. Your stage, Mrs. Reyes Aldridge. I walked back toward the living room slowly, deliberately, holding the same gift box in my hands that had been meant to mock me. The etiquette book. My Trojan horse. My souvenir. My evidence. The room had shifted in my absence. They could feel it. They didn't know why yet, but the energy had thickened. Like the air just before a thunderstorm. Caroline noticed me first. Elena, she said too brightly. There you are. Isabel, I corrected softly. Oh, of course. She waved a hand. Just so many names tonight. She was nervous. I could tell by the way she reached for her wine glass a second too quickly. I reclaimed my seat next to Nathan, who gave me a questioning glance. Everything okay? Perfect, I said, and I meant it. Wesley entered moments later, stepping into the room like a judge taking his bench. All conversation stopped. Even the quartet paused mid-carol. Forgive the interruption, he said. But I'd like to make a brief announcement before tomorrow's board meeting. Caroline rose instinctively. Wesley, surely this could wait until morning? It can't, he said. That silenced her. Henry Aldridge, Nathan's father, cleared his throat and stood. Of course, Wesley. We can move to the study if that's more appropriate. I think, Wesley said, looking directly at me, this is something everyone should hear. A ripple passed through the room. I felt Nathan stiffen beside me. Wesley gestured toward me. This concerns Isabel Reyes Aldridge and her role in tomorrow's meeting. Another ripple. My role? I asked innocently. Wesley smiled. Yes, I believe you'll be taking a more central seat at the table. Henry frowned. She's not on the board. No, Wesley agreed. But she's the majority shareholder. You know that moment in a movie when the soundtrack cuts and all you hear is the hum of stunned silence? That's exactly what it felt like. Cousin Trevor actually choked on his scotch. Excuse me? Caroline asked, her voice like a cracked bell. Wesley stepped forward and placed the folder on the coffee table in front of the Christmas tree. Every acquisition, every vote, every proxy transfer, he said. Executed through fully legal and documented channels. Mrs. Reyes Aldridge now holds controlling interest in Aldridge Global. The room erupted. Voices layered over each other in disbelief, accusation, and defense. This is absurd. Impossible. She's not even. There must be a mistake. And then, through the chaos, came the words that stopped everything. You bought the company? Nathan. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even shocked. Just stunned. I turned toward him. Yes. How long? He asked, his voice low. 2 years in motion. Finalized 3 months ago. He blinked. Processing. You didn't tell me. I wanted you to love me without it, I said quietly. And you did. His hand found mine under the velvet throw pillow. Still do, he whispered. Across the room, Alexandra stepped forward, voice sharp with disbelief. You're telling us that a janitor's daughter now owns Aldridge Global? I stood, holding the etiquette book. Yes, I said. And don't worry, I've been brushing up on my table manners. I set the book on the coffee table beside the folder. Its gold-embossed cover glinted in the firelight. Now, if you'd all like to discuss social advancement, I said, I'd be happy to walk you through the new performance-based structure we're implementing next quarter. The silence that followed was delicious. Wesley leaned back, hands in his pockets, watching the moment unfold with barely concealed satisfaction. You planned this, Caroline said, voice trembling. No, I replied. You did. With every smirk. Every backhanded compliment. Every door you closed. Every chair you didn't offer. Every time you forgot my name. You gave me every reason and every opportunity. I turned to the room. Starting tomorrow, this company will be led by merit. Not legacy. Not lineage. Not last names. Victoria scoffed. You think you can undo generations of tradition in a single year? No, I said. But I can begin. And I already had. It's strange how quickly a room full of people can shift from confidently smug to cautiously silent. All it takes is the truth walking in, uninvited and impossible to ignore. The moment I said performance-based structure, I swear the chandelier above the Christmas tree shuddered. Wesley stepped aside like a master of ceremonies at the end of a magic trick, but this wasn't illusion. This wasn't smoke and mirrors. This was receipts, ownership, and leverage stacked in cold, hard files. I watched as the Aldridge family, wrapped in their layers of old money and old rules, tried to process the fact that I now owned the legacy they'd spent generations protecting like a precious heirloom. Caroline's face was frozen in polite horror. Victoria's wine glass tilted slightly in her grip. Henry Aldridge, patriarch and self-declared visionary, stood rigid as if sheer posture could stop the room from collapsing around him. Let me be clear, I said, my voice cutting across the low hum of rising panic. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't luck. I've been planning this for 2 years. I reached into my laptop bag and pulled out a second folder, thicker, heavier. Paper has a presence, and I wanted them to feel the weight of it. I set it on the coffee table beside the etiquette book they'd gifted me. This contains a full audit of Aldridge Global over the last decade, I continued. Performance data, internal memos, project outcomes, and the financial consequences of every executive decision made by this family. Trevor, Nathan's cousin and self-proclaimed financial genius, scoffed. You really expect us to believe you ran a forensic audit without access? I had access, I replied. More than you think. For example, your assistant CC'd me on 3 internal budget reports last spring. Didn't even notice. His face flushed. Besides, I added, when you own the company, you don't need permission to read your own records. Wesley smiled faintly from his corner. He wasn't speaking anymore. He didn't need to. This was my moment. He was just here to bear witness. Let's talk about the Dubai expansion, I said, flipping to a marked page. Trevor approved a $12 million venture with a partner who had already been blacklisted by 2 international banks. When the deal collapsed, the losses were buried under a vague line item labeled regional instability. Those were market risks, Trevor snapped. No, I replied. They were arrogance and negligence. And that negligence cost the company 8% of its quarterly revenue. You weren't held accountable because your last name was Aldridge. The room was quiet. Still, every eye was on me. I turned the page. Peter rejected 3 rounds of modernization proposals from our IT division, I continued. One of which would have prevented the data breach that cost us our contract with Meridian Pharmaceuticals. You dismissed it as unnecessary spending. Peter's jaw clenched. Those upgrades weren't proven. They were implemented in our West Coast division under my directive, I said. Results? A 40% increase in efficiency and 0 security issues. No one spoke. I flipped again. Alexandra, I said. Let's talk about the company card. Her eyes widened. What card? The one you used for a $14,000 client meeting in Paris last March that involved no clients and coincided with Paris Fashion Week. I know because I cross-checked the hotel records with your Instagram posts. Lovely dress, by the way. A collective gasp rippled through the room. You're spying on us now? Alexandra hissed. I'm auditing, I corrected. Spying implies secrecy. This is accountability. I set the folder down, letting the silence settle in. I didn't come here to humiliate you, I said. Believe it or not, I came here to give you a choice. Caroline straightened in her chair. A choice? Yes, I said. You can continue to cling to a system that has failed everyone but yourselves, or you can be part of a company that values merit, innovation, and actual contribution. Henry finally spoke, his voice a low growl. You think you can dismantle decades of structure, of legacy, and rebuild it overnight? I'm not rebuilding overnight, I said. I've already started. And the results speak for themselves. I turned toward the TV above the fireplace. May I? I asked, looking to Wesley. He gave a nod. By all means. I connected my laptop and the screen flickered to life, displaying a sleek dashboard filled with charts, graphs, and numbers. This is the West Coast division over the last 6 months, I said. Employee development programs, cross-department mentorship, digital transformation, and transparent advancement pathways. The room watched as the numbers told the story. 45% increase in productivity, 60% drop in turnover, $27 million in savings from operational efficiency. Employee satisfaction scores at an all-time high. These results, I said, came from listening to people your family never noticed. A line supervisor in Phoenix, an IT analyst in Portland, a warehouse manager in Reno. People who weren't invited to galas or mentioned in press releases. I paused, letting it sink in. You've spent years looking outward, Europe, Dubai, Tokyo, trying to expand your image. But you never looked inward. You never saw what was right in front of you. Caroline shifted uncomfortably. Isabel, this spectacle is unnecessary. If you wanted to be heard, there were channels. Proper meetings. Discussions. I tried, I said. Emails. Memos. Meetings where I wasn't invited to speak. Ideas dismissed before they were even read. I turned to Nathan. You remember the employee development fund I pitched last year? He nodded slowly. They tabled it, I said. Called it idealistic. Then they approved funding for another golf retreat in Napa. Victoria opened her mouth to object, but I cut her off. You want to know why I went around you? Because your system was never designed to listen to people like me. So I built my own. The final slide came up, an organizational chart with updated roles. This is what the company will look like starting next quarter. Every position, from executive to entry level, will be evaluated based on actual performance. Family name won't be a factor. Gasps. Protests. Questions. I held up a hand. Everyone here has a decision to make. You can adapt. Learn. Earn your place. Or step aside. And if we refuse? Trevor challenged. You'll receive generous severance packages, I replied. And the press will receive a full report of your tenure. Alexandra crossed her arms. You think the board will stand for this? Wesley stepped forward. They already have, he said calmly. I've briefed them over the past month. The vote of confidence was unanimous. Henry stared at him. You betrayed us. I protected the company, Wesley replied. You stopped running a business. You were running a legacy museum. Isabel turned it back into a future. I looked at them all, the room full of people who once decided whether I was worth including in a conversation. Now watching me shape their future with a laptop and a plan. This isn't personal, I said. But it is permanent. Then I picked up the etiquette book and held it out to Caroline. Thank you for the gift, I said. It reminded me just how far I've come. And just how far they'd fallen behind. You'd be amazed how quickly the powerful unravel when the stage lights swing off of them. 1 minute, they're clinking glasses, laughing at inside jokes built on old money and older power. The next, they're flipping through printed organizational charts like drowning men scanning evacuation maps, too late, too deep, and no one coming to save them. The TV screen above the fireplace flickered with charts. Not projections anymore, these were confirmations. Signed approvals. Departmental shakeups. Terminations. Promotions. A complete rewiring of Aldridge Global's leadership structure. And the first domino had already tipped. Trevor Aldridge, once so smug about his instinct for market trends, stood silent as Wesley Darnell calmly handed him a manila envelope. His name, in all caps, printed across the top. I don't need to open this, Trevor muttered. You do, I said. Because I want you to read it out loud. The room froze. Someone inhaled too sharply. Maybe Caroline. Trevor looked at me, his jaw twitching. You think humiliating us makes you stronger? I think accountability isn't the same as humiliation, I replied evenly. But if you find them interchangeable, maybe that says more about you than it does about me. Trevor opened the envelope. He read in a flat voice. Effective immediately, Trevor Aldridge is relieved of his role as Senior VP of International Investments and reassigned to a junior analyst role within corporate risk and recovery. A laugh, sharp and bitter, came from the far corner. Alexandra. Her relief was so thick I could smell it. She thought she was safe. She wasn't. I turned to her. Would you like to go next? The color drained from her face faster than the Prosecco in her glass. Alexandra, I continued, has been found to have improperly expensed over $142,000 in personal travel, luxury goods, and unauthorized client entertainment during her time as director of corporate partnerships. That's absurd, she snapped. You're twisting numbers. I have the receipts. Literally, I replied, holding up a thin stack of itemized statements. Would you like to dispute the $4,700 charged to the company card at Fontainebleau Spa? Or the $1,200 Valentino heels listed as a client incentive? That was for branding, she said through gritted teeth. For your brand, I shot back. Her envelope was already on the table. She didn't touch it. She didn't have to. The room understood. Her position was dissolved. Victoria stood up suddenly, panic driving her movements. This isn't legal. You can't just. I can, I said, cutting her off. And I have. Every reassignment, every restructure, every exit package reviewed, approved, and notarized. You may have had the name, but I have the rights. She looked to Caroline, as if her mother-in-law could summon the ghosts of privilege past to swoop in and rescue her. Caroline stepped forward, that brittle smile welded to her face. Isabel, we understand that changes are necessary. But surely we can have a more civil discussion. Perhaps a private meeting. There will be a board meeting tomorrow, I said, but tonight is about transparency. You've operated in shadows long enough. Time to turn the lights on. I picked up another envelope. Peter, I called. He didn't move. This one's yours, I said. Your resistance to modernization cost this company several major contracts. You turned down digital upgrades, blocked cybersecurity initiatives, and refused every single one of Catherine's proposals because you didn't think they were practical. His fingers curled around the arms of his chair. They weren't proven. They are now, I said. In every division I piloted quietly, her ideas yielded up to a 50% increase in operational efficiency. Peter finally looked at Catherine, truly looked at her, and for a brief moment, I saw fear behind his eyes. Not just fear of being fired. Fear of being irrelevant. Catherine looked back at him. Not smug. Just calm. She'd waited years for someone to listen. You're welcome to stay, I told Peter. But not as an executive. You'll be reporting to Catherine in her new role as Chief Innovation Officer. Silence fell again. No one laughed. No one sneered. Because now the hierarchy was shattering and the people they'd stepped over were rising. Are you enjoying this? Caroline asked sharply, her voice ablaze. No, I said. But I am committed to it. There's a difference. You think you can shame this family out of existence? She hissed. I shook my head. No, Caroline. I think you did that all on your own. And then came the envelope I'd been holding in reserve. The one I'd thought long and hard about. Henry Aldridge. His name echoed in corporate circles like royalty. He'd been chairman emeritus for almost a decade, and yet his influence stretched into every corner of the company, through intimidation, through legacy, through sheer force of ego. He was the one who once told me, with a straight face, pedigree is more important than performance. I held his envelope like a judge holds a verdict. This one's optional, I said. You're retired. Technically. But your influence has directly contributed to decades of nepotism, unethical hiring practices, and discriminatory policies. I'd like to offer you something most of the people in this room never got, a choice. Henry's brow rose. You can accept a ceremonial title with no operational control, I continued. Or you can be formally removed from all company matters, including board observation. Either way, Wesley added, your last name no longer entitles you to a seat at the table. Henry took the envelope without a word. His hands trembled slightly. It wasn't the paper that made him shake. It was the reality that the empire he'd built on name and lineage had finally collapsed. Victoria, meanwhile, had started pacing, her voice rising. This is a power grab. A hostile takeover. You don't care about the company. You just want revenge. I turned to her. No, I said, my voice flat. I want results. You ran this place like a pageant. I'm turning it into a meritocracy. If that threatens you, maybe it's time you ask yourself why. I've worked here for 10 years, she spat. And made zero contributions of measurable impact, I replied. I did the audit. You've spent more time arranging brand partnerships for galas than managing crisis response plans. Your team has no retention. Your strategies have no ROI. Her breath hitched. Your role is being dissolved, I said. You may reapply for a position in community outreach, based on qualifications. The room shifted again. The Aldridges had spent so long speaking in measured tones and rehearsed lines, they had no language for collapse. The etiquette book still sat on the table beside the folders. I looked at it one last time, then picked it up and handed it to Carlos, the former house staff member who'd now be overseeing our employee development program. Put this in the company archive, I told him, as a reminder of how far we've come and how far we refuse to fall back. He nodded, proud and tall in a suit he'd bought himself for this moment. Then I turned back to the room, the shell of what had once been the Aldridge dynasty. I'm not here to destroy your name, I said. I'm here to prove it doesn't give you immunity. This is still our company, Caroline whispered, more to herself than anyone else. No, I said. It was your company. Now it belongs to everyone who earns their place. And just like that, the illusion shattered. The elites had fallen. And all that was left was the truth. They used to say this company was their legacy. Aldridge Global, 4 generations of wealth, power, and influence dressed up in branded charity galas, magazine features, and custom-engraved pens that said things like tradition, excellence, heritage. The kind of legacy you hang on a wall and expect everyone to bow to. But tonight, right here in this grand living room with its ivory moldings and its chandelier casting fractured light across stunned faces, that legacy cracked. And I didn't raise my voice once. The room still smelled like pine and spiced rum, but the energy had shifted completely. The Aldridges were quiet now. No one was posturing. No one was circling the conversation like predators. The wolves had lost their teeth. They were listening. And that was new. Caroline had sunk into the nearest armchair, staring off at the fireplace, her fingers curled around the stem of her now warm champagne. Trevor and Alexandra were gone. They'd left with slamming doors and empty threats about lawyers. Peter remained, red-faced and still, trying to process the fact that he now reported to the cousin he used to call naive in staff meetings. Nathan sat beside me, quiet but steady, his expression unreadable. He was still adjusting. The man who had loved me for my strength never expected it to rise this far, this fast, this visibly. Are you okay? I asked him, low enough that only he could hear. His eyes flicked to mine. I'm proud. I'm just trying to keep up. I squeezed his hand. Then we're good. Wesley stood to speak again, his voice smooth and authoritative. This transition will not be without its challenges. But it's not an ending, it's a beginning. And the market will respond favorably to a company that leads with integrity, performance, and innovation. He turned toward me. Isabel, would you like to present the next phase? I rose. Phase 3, cultural rewriting. This one wasn't in an envelope. This one lived in every department, every hallway, every email, and every employee who had ever swallowed their brilliance to survive a boardroom run by bloodlines. I stepped forward, facing the people who once whispered gold digger behind crystal flutes. This company's legacy, I said slowly, was built on tradition. But tradition is only useful if it evolves. Otherwise, it becomes a cage. No one interrupted me. They couldn't. Not now. For years, I continued, contributions were measured by surnames. Promotions went to cousins, not candidates. Decisions were made behind closed doors by people who had never walked the factory floor, never sat with the customer service team, never read a single employee survey. I let that hang there. That ends now. The TV behind me lit up again, this time showing faces. Not graphs. Faces. Employees from every floor, every function. Warehouse teams. Frontline reps. Data analysts. Engineering interns. These are the people who built your numbers, I said. The ones who stayed late, who worked weekends, who trained your new hires while you toured vineyards and launched limited edition Aldridge cufflinks. A quiet cough from Caroline. I didn't stop. In the past 6 months, I ran test programs in 2 divisions. Merit-based evaluations. Open communication channels between junior and senior staff. Anonymous innovation challenges. Mentorship pairings. What did we get? A 60% increase in retention. A 35% reduction in internal conflict. And record high employee satisfaction. I looked directly at Henry. Your legacy relied on fear and silence. Mine will thrive on transparency and trust. A murmur ran through the room. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was a blueprint. I clicked the next slide, the restructured hierarchy chart. The familiar executive tower was gone. In its place, a flat, agile model. Cross-functional teams. Leadership based on outcome, not pedigree. No more promotions based on who plays tennis at the same club, I said. No more vetoes on ideas because they come from the wrong floor. Starting now, Aldridge Global will be a place where your work speaks louder than your last name. Catherine's eyes welled with tears. Not sadness. Recognition. After years of submitting proposals no one read, she was finally being heard. I clicked again. Effective next quarter, I said, we'll roll out the Career Bridge program. Every employee will have access to free upskilling tracks, mentorship sessions, and internal mobility pathways. From janitor to project manager, it'll happen. From receptionist to strategy director, it'll happen. From janitor's daughter to CEO, already happened. Victoria raised a hand. Her voice, when she found it, was softer than I'd ever heard it. What about those of us who want to stay? I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply answered. You'll stay, I said, if you're willing to work. If you're willing to learn. If you're willing to accept that respect is earned, not inherited. Victoria nodded slowly. Then I'd like to try. She sat back down. I advanced one more slide. This one showed our new corporate creed: respect, performance, progress. I turned to the room. This company, I said, will not be built on shame. It will be built on truth. And the truth is, many of you had chances to do better. You didn't. But this is your moment to choose who you want to be moving forward. Henry stood, slow but deliberate. He walked toward the TV and studied the creed on the screen. My grandfather built this company with nothing but a handshake and a handshake promise, he said. And then it became something else, I replied gently. And that something was starting to rot. He nodded once. I see that now. He turned to the rest of the family. I stayed too long, he admitted. I clung too tightly. I mistook legacy for license. But I won't be the reason this company fails. He turned back to me. I'd like to serve as a mentor in your Career Bridge program. No title. No perks. Just a final contribution before I go. For the first time since the evening began, the entire room clapped. Because that's what legacy should be, a bridge, not a burden. I looked to Carlos, standing at the back with his new team. I looked to Catherine, to Maria, to the young employees watching on the internal company live stream. And then I said what I'd been waiting years to say. Welcome to the new Aldridge Global. Not the one on the stationery. The real one. The one that now included every voice that had once been silenced. The grandfather clock struck midnight. The room didn't cheer. No toasts. No carols. No glasses clinking under chandeliers. Just silence, reverent and fragile, as if even the house knew something sacred had cracked open. I stood at the heart of the Aldridge mansion, not as an outsider or an ornament, but as its unshakable axis. Outside, snow fell in delicate sheets, dusting the manicured hedges and obscuring the marble lions at the estate's gate. Inside, the past lay in pieces around us, enameled entitlement, broken hierarchy, the etiquette book I'd handed to Carlos now displayed on a credenza like a museum relic. Across the living room, the family sat in stunned reflection. Some clutched the updated organizational charts like lifelines, some like eulogies. Others just stared at their hands as if seeing them for the first time, empty of power, finally. I exhaled slowly, the kind of breath you only take when a storm has passed and you're still standing. Catherine approached me first, soft-voiced and certain. Isabel, she said. I don't know what to say. You don't have to, I told her. You earned this. She looked down at the Chief Innovation Officer appointment letter I'd handed her earlier and shook her head in quiet disbelief. For years, I thought I was crazy for pushing so hard, for dreaming so big. You made me feel sane again. I smiled. Courage looks a lot like delusion until the world catches up. Carlos joined us, now flanked by 2 young associates, former house staff who'd been moved into development roles. We've already started uploading the updated policies, he told me. And Maria asked if she could come in tomorrow to help finalize the rollout schedule. Tell her she has Christmas off, I said. And the day after. Full pay. He smiled, then added, she said she'd still like to come. Says it feels good to show up where you're finally seen. Across the room, Henry Aldridge sipped from a cup of black coffee, no longer the commanding titan of industry, just a man watching the future rearrange itself in front of him. He didn't look angry. He looked humbled. Maybe for the first time in his life. He caught my gaze and gave me a small nod. Not approval. Not deference. Respect. That alone was worth more than his title. The doors to the grand foyer opened, letting in a gust of cold air, and with it, a crowd of employees who'd been invited after the formal announcement. Maintenance staff, factory workers, administrative assistants, customer service agents. People the family had once dismissed as invisible. But not tonight. Tonight, they were honored guests. We served them coffee and pastries from the Aldridge private kitchen. The same kitchen that had, until now, been reserved for catering socialite brunches and club fundraisers. They stood beneath the 20-foot Christmas tree and laughed, not nervously, but freely, like they belonged. Because they did. One by one, I introduced them by name. Not title. Name. This is Jada, who developed the new scheduling algorithm for our Eastern region logistics. This is Miguel, who saved us $180,000 by redesigning our equipment maintenance rotation. This is Kieran, who noticed a data leak before our cybersecurity team caught it. Each name, each contribution, met with applause. Because now, performance wasn't just appreciated. It was recognized. Caroline sat in the corner, watching it all unfold with a tight expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't anger anymore, it was something else. Reflection? Regret? A quiet unraveling? She rose and walked toward me. Slowly. Her pearls gleamed in the soft lights, but the hauteur was gone from her step. I misjudged you, she said simply. That's one way of putting it, I replied. I thought I was protecting the family, she murmured. But maybe I was protecting the idea of the family, not its future. I didn't respond. She needed to say it. Not me. After a moment, she reached into her clutch and handed me a card. It's from your father, she said. It was delivered earlier, but set aside. I took it, heart-catching slightly. The envelope was plain white, my name scrawled in his familiar handwriting. I opened it and read, Mihija. Tonight, let them see what I always saw. Lead with honor. Walk with strength. Love with grace. I'll be watching. Always. Papa. Tears pressed behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not yet. I tucked the card into my coat pocket like a talisman. Because I wasn't just writing a new legacy tonight, I was continuing his. Would you like to see the new boardroom? I asked Caroline quietly. She blinked. You redesigned it? I nodded. It's not a boardroom anymore. It's a collaboration studio. Circular table. Glass walls. Everyone sees everything. She hesitated, then gave the faintest smile. You really did it. I turned to the rest of the room and clinked my glass. Everyone, I said. Before you go, there's one last gift. Wesley handed me a stack of sealed envelopes, one for each guest, each staff member. I passed them out slowly, intentionally. Inside, personalized letters detailing their new roles, salary adjustments, and education credits for continued development. When Carlos opened his and read the line, Director of Organizational Empowerment, his eyes glistened. You mean it? He asked. I've always meant it, I said. But now it's official. As dawn broke over Burlington, the first rays of Christmas morning painted the marble floors gold. The estate looked different in this light. Less cold. Less exclusive. More possible. I stepped outside, coat wrapped around me, as snowflakes brushed my cheeks. Nathan followed, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. You changed everything, he whispered. No, I corrected. I revealed everything. They just never looked. He turned me gently to face him. And what now? What comes after the takeover? I looked out at the driveway, where the same luxury cars now shared space with compact sedans and delivery trucks, where chauffeurs and executives alike sipped from the same thermos of coffee we'd brewed in bulk. Now, I said, we build. Together. Nathan smiled. You're not the woman I married. I smiled back. No. I'm stronger. He kissed my temple. And I knew right then that the real legacy we were building didn't live in stock portfolios or gold-lettered names on glass towers. It lived in people. It lived in every employee who'd been told to stay in their lane and now had keys to the map. Every daughter told to marry up instead of rising on her own. Every person who'd waited too long for someone to believe in their talent. It lived in my father's calloused hands. In Maria's kindness. In Carlos's quiet brilliance. In Catherine's overlooked ideas. In my voice, no longer quiet, no longer rehearsed, but resolute. So yes, this was a Christmas to remember. Not for its sparkle. Not for the tree. Not even for the dramatic reversal. But because it was the morning when, for the first time in Aldrich history, the future belonged to everyone. And I was proud to lead it.